The metallic scrape of tank tracks on cobblestone echoed through the Norman village as Obergefreiter Klaus Richter adjusted his black Panzer beret and smiled. His Panther's 88mm gun could punch through American armor at 2,000 meters, twice the range of anything the Allies possessed. The fate of Nazi Germany hung in the balance as June 1944 dawned, but German tank crews still believed their technological superiority would save the Reich. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of World War II's most dramatic reversals, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from history. Richter's crew had spent the morning of June 5, 1944, cleaning the barrel of their 75-ton monster, its Dunkelgelb base coat streaked with hand-applied brown and green camouflage that made it nearly invisible among the Norman hedgerows. The acrid smell of gun oil, mixed with diesel exhaust and the earthy dampness of the bocage countryside. Through his fingers, Richter could feel the reassuring thickness of the Panther's frontal armor, 100 millimeters of hardened steel that could stop any Allied shell. "The Americans," he wrote in his field diary that evening, "have sent us their Shermans. These tin cans burn so easily, the crews call them Ronsons. They light every time." The mockery wasn't confined to Richter's tank. Across Panzer Lehr Division, veteran crews who had survived the Russian front exchanged dark jokes about Allied armor. The M4 Sherman, they knew, carried only 76 millimeters of frontal armor at best. Its 75mm M3 gun was adequate for infantry support, but laughably inadequate against German heavy tanks. Tank Commander Hauptmann Friedrich Weber noted in his report to division headquarters, "Enemy medium tanks present minimal threat at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Our Panthers engage with impunity." Dawn broke gray and threatening on June 6, 1944. At 0630 hours, the thunder began. Allied naval guns had opened fire on the Norman coast with a fury that shook the earth 40 kilometers inland. Richter's Panther crew, positioned near St. Vith in the Bocage country, felt the tremors through their steel floor plates. The radio crackled with fragmented reports. Massive landings at multiple beaches, thousands of ships darkening the horizon. Paratroopers scattered across the countryside like deadly confetti. But Panzer Lehr remained confident. Their 64 Panthers and 89 Panzer IVs represented the Reich's most technically advanced armored formation. Each Panther mounted the legendary 88mm KBUK-42 gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The crews had trained for months in the Norman countryside, learning every hedgerow, every farm lane, every defensive position. "Let them come," wrote Oberfeldwebel Hans Müller, commander of a Panzer IV in the 2nd Company. "Their numbers mean nothing when each of our tanks can kill 3 of theirs before they close to effective range." The mathematical reality seemed to support German confidence. Intelligence reports suggested the Allies possessed primarily M4 Shermans, 30-ton medium tanks with inadequate armor and guns. Even the newer M4A3 variants, mounting 76mm high-velocity guns, could barely penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at 500 meters. German crews had studied captured Sherman manuals, noting the cramped 5-man arrangement. Driver and assistant driver squeezed into the hull. Commander, gunner, and loader packed into the turret like sardines. "Poor bastards," Richter confided to his loader. "No room to fight, no armor to protect them, no gun to hurt us." The first Sherman Richter encountered appeared through the morning mist on June 8, 1944, as American armor probed inland from Omaha Beach. The enemy tank moved cautiously along a farm road, its commander's head visible in the open hatch, binoculars scanning the hedgerows. Richter's gunner, Unteroffizier Werner Kleist, had a clear shot at 1,200 meters. "American medium tank, traverse left," Richter commanded through the intercom. "Range 1,200. Load armor piercing." The Panther's main gun swiveled with hydraulic precision. Kleist's crosshairs centered on the Sherman's turret ringed the tank's most vulnerable point. One shot would end this quickly. But something felt different this morning. The radio chatter spoke not of isolated American probes, but of massive formations, hundreds of tanks, thousands of vehicles, endless columns streaming inland from the beaches. Division intelligence reported that the Allies had landed 132,000 men on June 6th alone, supported by 6,000 ships and 11,000 aircraft. Still, the Germans held faith in their technological edge. The Sherman turned away before Kleist could fire, disappearing into the maze of hedgerows that characterized the Norman bocage. Cowards. Mueller radioed from his position 800 meters to the south. They run when they see real armor. Yet even as the German crews maintained their confident banter, troubling signs multiplied. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights reported Allied armor concentrations that defied comprehension. Photographic intelligence showed tank parks stretching for kilometers, assembly areas packed with thousands of vehicles, supply columns that extended beyond the horizon. Tank parks that never emptied. The Americans, it seemed, possessed an industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than German guns could create them. For every Sherman destroyed, 2 more appeared. Every morning brought fresh reports of new Allied divisions landing, new armor formations assembling, new threats developing across the Norman countryside. But Richter and his comrades remained confident. Quality would triumph over quantity, as it always had. German tank crews were the best trained in the world, their equipment the most advanced, their tactical doctrine proven in 3 years of combat across 2 continents. The fields of Normandy stretched before them, peaceful and green in the early summer sunshine. Soon, Richter believed, those same fields would be littered with burning American armor, testimony to the superiority of German engineering and the skill of Panzer crews. He had no way of knowing that within 6 weeks, those fields would indeed burn, but not with Allied armor. What Richter couldn't see from his position in the bocage was the true scale of what was coming. Beyond the beaches, Allied logistics officers were assembling the greatest concentration of military power in human history. The numbers would have staggered him. 2,451 tanks and tank destroyers in the American sector alone, supported by unlimited ammunition, fuel, and replacement crews. The confidence would not last much longer. The crack of splintering wood echoed through the Norman hedgerow as Richter's Panther crashed through another ancient stone wall. The metallic tang of cordite hung in the humid air, mixing with the sickly sweet smell of crushed summer flowers and diesel exhaust that clung to everything. By late July 1944, the mathematical certainty of German armored superiority was dissolving into the nightmare reality of attrition warfare. 6 weeks of fighting in the bocage had transformed the confident Panzer crews into exhausted survivors of a grinding war of nerves. The Norman countryside, with its maze of 1,000-year-old hedgerows, stone walls, and sunken lanes, had neutralized every German advantage. Visibility dropped to 30 meters in most sectors. The superior range of the 88mm gun meant nothing when enemy tanks appeared from behind cover at spitting distance. "Range 50 meters," Kleist whispered into the intercom. On July 22nd, his voice tight with tension. American tank, direct front. Through his periscope, Richter watched an M4A3 Sherman nose around the corner of a demolished farmhouse, its 76mm gun traversing toward his position. This wasn't the older 75mm gun they'd encountered in June. Intelligence reports spoke of new variants, mounting high-velocity weapons that could penetrate even Panther armor at close range. The Sherman fired first. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther's mantlet with a sound like the world's largest bell, sending small fragments ricocheting around the fighting compartment. Richter's ears rang as Kleist returned fire, his 88mm round punching through the Sherman's frontal armor and setting it ablaze in seconds. Another kill. Another American crew dead. But for every Sherman destroyed, 2 more appeared the next morning. The replacement rate defied German comprehension. Panzer Division had entered Normandy with 145 tanks. By mid-July, only 28 remained operational. The Americans, meanwhile, seemed to possess unlimited reserves. Intelligence reported that Allied tank parks near the beaches contained thousands of vehicles, more armor than the entire Wehrmacht possessed on the Western Front. Fuel status? Richter asked his driver over the intercom. Half tank, Herr Obergefreiter. Maybe 200 kilometers. 200 kilometers. In Russia, they'd operated with fuel for 800. The fuel shortage had become critical by July, with many Panthers immobilized in villages, abandoned for lack of diesel. Richter's crew had taken to siphoning fuel from knocked-out vehicles, German and American alike, just to keep moving. The radio crackled with another damage report from 2nd Company. Tiger 77, mechanical breakdown, vicinity grid 247, requesting recovery, recovery that would never come. The Reich's industrial capacity, stretched beyond breaking after 5 years of war, could no longer replace the complex machinery being destroyed daily in Norman fields. Each lost Panther represented months of irreplaceable production. Each lost crew took years of training with them. The Americans treated their Shermans like ammunition. Richter had watched Allied recovery teams work, marveling at their efficiency. Knocked-out Shermans disappeared within hours, either repaired or replaced. The replacement crews seemed endless young faces that spoke of a nation that could afford to lose tanks and train new crews faster than Germany could destroy them. The July heat turned tank interiors into furnaces. Metal surfaces radiated warmth that made touching them painful. Binoculars fogged constantly. The radio's persistent static became a soundtrack of tension, punctuated by increasingly desperate status reports from scattered German units. Elements encircled near Kutenses. Lost vehicles to air attack. Grid reference follows. Only fragments of units remain operational. The language of defeat, broadcast in terse military code across frequencies that American radio intercept teams monitored with growing satisfaction. But the most unnerving change was in the Shermans themselves. The early models that had burned so readily were being replaced by variants with improved armor and ammunition storage. American engineers had solved the fire problem with wet stowage systems that surrounded ammunition with glycol coolant. The newer M4A3 models mounting 76mm guns could penetrate Panzer IV armor at 600 meters closer than German crews wanted American tanks to get. The tide was turning. One technical improvement at a time. On July 24th, Division Headquarters issued an unusual order. All available armor would concentrate for a defensive operation against an anticipated major American offensive. Intelligence suggested something called Operation Cobra, a massive breakout attempt scheduled to begin the following morning. Richter studied the tactical map by the light of a shielded flashlight. American positions stretched along a 25-kilometer front west of Saint-Lô. Allied air reconnaissance had photographed German positions with disturbing accuracy, marking every concealed tank, every camouflaged gun position, every supply dump. "How many tanks do they have?" his loader asked, peering over Richter's shoulder at the intelligence estimates. 2,451 tanks and tank destroyers in their sector, Richter read from the briefing paper, plus unlimited artillery and air support. The number hung in the fetid air of the command post like a death sentence. Panzer could field 12 operational Panzer IVs and 16 Panthers against nearly 2,500 Allied armored vehicles. The mathematics of modern warfare had shifted beyond German comprehension. Industrial capacity, not tactical skill, would determine victory. The Americans had built an army that could absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting. They produced more tanks in a month than Germany managed in a year. Yet German crews still believed in miracles. Quality over quantity. Mueller radioed from his Panzer IV, hidden among the ruins of a bombed church. 1 German tank equals 5 American, the old formula, repeated like a prayer by men who had seen too many comrades burn. But the arithmetic of attrition was relentless. Even if 1 German tank could destroy 5 Shermans, what happened when the Americans brought 50 or 500? The sound that would haunt German tankers forever began at dawn on July 25th. The drone of Allied bombers approaching in endless waves. Richter pressed his face against his periscope, watching the sky darken with aircraft. B-24 Liberators, B-17, Flying Fortresses, medium bombers, fighter bombers, aerial armada that blotted out the morning Sunday. The Americans had assembled more than 3,000 aircraft for the opening phase of Cobra. The bombardment that followed lasted 3 hours. When the last bomber disappeared toward England, the Norman countryside had been transformed into a moonscape of overlapping craters. Entire villages had vanished. Roads had disappeared under tons of rubble. Trees stood like charred skeletons against a sky still thick with smoke and dust. And through this devastation, the Shermans began to roll, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of American tanks emerging from the smoke like mechanical ghosts. The sheer scale defied comprehension. Endless columns that stretched beyond the horizon, supported by artillery that could flatten entire grid squares, covered by fighters that owned the sky. The confident Panzer crews of June had become desperate survivors of July, but they had not yet witnessed the true horror that American industrial might could unleash. The fields of Normandy were about to burn with a fury that would consume everything the Wehrmacht had brought to France. What happened next would shatter German morale forever. The first Sherman appeared through the smoke at 08:15 hours, July 25, 1944, its hull blackened by the bombardment, but its 76mm gun tracking steadily toward Richter's position. Behind it, like ghosts materializing from hell itself, came dozens more. This was the moment when German technological superiority died in the furnace of American industrial might. The preliminary bombardment had lasted 3 hours and 27 minutes longer than most German crews had expected to live through the entire war. The earth still trembled from the impact of 15,000 tons of high explosives dropped by wave after wave of Allied bombers. The Norman countryside, green and pastoral just hours before, had been transformed into a blackened wasteland that stretched beyond the horizon. Richter's Panther sat hull down behind the remains of what had been a Norman farmhouse. The stone walls had been pulverized into gravel. The apple orchard that had provided concealment was now a cemetery of splintered stumps, their charred remains jutting from crater-pocked earth like broken teeth. Target front, Kleist whispered into the intercom. Range 400, Sherman with the long gun. Through his commander's periscope, Richter watched the American tank advance with mechanical confidence. No hesitation, no careful reconnaissance, just the steady advance of a crew that knew they had unlimited support behind them. The Sherman's commander stood tall in his hatch, directing his driver with hand signals, seemingly oblivious to the danger. Such was American confidence after 6 weeks of industrial warfare. The Panther's 88mm gun fired with its familiar bark, the armor-piercing round striking the Sherman's turret and punching clean through. Smoke began pouring from the tank's hatches as the crew bailed out. But Richter felt no satisfaction. Through his periscope, he could see more Shermans advancing, a dozen, then 20, then so many he stopped counting. The radio crackled with panic from across the German front. Multiple enemy tanks, Grid 247. Request immediate artillery support. American armor breakthrough. Sector 5. But there was no artillery to respond. The massive American bombardment had destroyed most German guns, and those that survived couldn't obtain ammunition through the severed supply lines. The Luftwaffe, which might have provided close air support, had been swept from the skies by American fighters that flew in formations so large they darkened the Sunday. The mathematics of modern warfare were written in burning metal across Norman fields. By noon, on July 25th, Panzer Lehr Division had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Of the 28 tanks that had begun the day operational, only 6 remained in contact with headquarters. The rest lay scattered across the battlefield, some destroyed by direct hits, others abandoned when their crews ran out of ammunition or fuel. Richter's crew had fired their last armor-piercing round at 11:30 hours. The Panther's ammunition racks, designed to carry 84 rounds, were empty. Around them, the advancing American tide continued to roll forward with mechanical inevitability. "Fuel?" Richter asked his driver. "Quarter tank. Maybe 50 kilometers. 50 kilometers enough to retreat, if retreat were possible." But the roads behind them were clogged with burning vehicles, destroyed by American fighter bombers that attacked anything that moved. The bocage country that had once provided concealment had become a trap, with American tanks advancing along every lane, through every gap in the hedgerows. The fields themselves had begun to burn. Not just the vehicles, the very earth seemed to be on fire. Wheat that had stood ready for harvest just hours before was now charred stubble. Hay bales burned like funeral pyres, sending columns of black smoke into the summer sky. Oil from destroyed vehicles had soaked into the soil, creating fires that would smolder for days. A horizontal thunderstorm of metal and earth. The phrase, coined by a survivor of the bombardment, captured something that no military manual had prepared German crews to face. The Allied aerial assault had been so intense that horses and cattle were found dead from shrapnel wounds miles from the impact zones. The concussion alone had stunned men and animals, leaving German soldiers wandering in shock through landscapes they no longer recognized. Through the smoke, Richter watched American recovery teams working with mechanical efficiency. Sherman tanks that had been knocked out were already being towed away by massive recovery vehicles. Fresh tanks moved up to replace them, their crews looking confident and well-fed in a way that German tankers hadn't seen since 1941. The industrial capacity that made such replacements possible was beyond German comprehension. Intelligence reports spoke of American factories that produced more tanks in a single day than German plants managed in a month. The Ford plant at Willow Run alone built a bomber every 63 minutes. The scale of American production turned individual tank battles into exercises in mathematics. For every Panzer destroyed, America could build 10 Shermans. "Herr Obergefreiter," his loader whispered. "What do we do?" Richter studied the tactical situation through his periscope. American tanks were advancing along 3 separate axes, supported by infantry that moved with the confidence of men who knew air support was only a radio call away. German resistance had collapsed along a 20-kilometer front. The breakthrough was complete. For the first time since joining the Wehrmacht, Klaus Richter gave an order he had never imagined speaking. "Abandon tank. Destroy all classified materials. We withdraw on foot." The crew looked at him in stunned silence. Abandon a Panther, the most advanced tank in the world, reduced to useless metal by empty fuel tanks and depleted ammunition racks? Such was the arithmetic of attrition warfare against an industrial giant. As Richter's crew prepared to destroy their tank and flee on foot, the scale of the German collapse was becoming clear across the Norman front. The U.S. 2nd Armored Division would report destroying 64 German tanks and 538 other combat vehicles during the breakout and pursuit. These numbers, recorded in meticulous American after-action reports, told the story of an army being consumed by forces it could not match or replace. The fields that had once mocked American armor now bore witness to the industrial democracy's ultimate weapon, not superior technology, but unlimited production capacity, married to unshakable determination. If this incredible reversal of fortune has captured your attention, you're witnessing one of history's most dramatic examples of industrial might triumphing over tactical skill. This is the kind of untold story we bring you every week. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss these deep dives into the moments that changed the world. The burning fields of Normandy would smolder for days, their black scars visible from aircraft flying at 5,000 feet. But the real fire, the one that would consume the Wehrmacht's confidence forever, was just beginning to spread. The collapse of Army Group West was now inevitable, but the German High Command didn't know it yet. 3 weeks later, Klaus Richter stood among the charred remains of what had once been the most powerful armored formation in the Wehrmacht, watching American bulldozers push German tanks into mass graves. The metallic screech of steel against steel echoed across fields that still reeked of burned hydraulic oil and death. By August 22, 1944, the price of underestimating American industrial might had been paid in full, written in the ashes of an entire army. The Falaise Pocket had become the graveyard of German hopes in France. Surrounded by converging Allied forces, remnants of Army Group West found themselves trapped in a shrinking cauldron of destruction. What had begun as confident mockery of Sherman tanks in June had ended with the annihilation of 7 German divisions and the capture of 50,000 prisoners. Richter, now a prisoner himself, had spent the final days of the pocket in a foxhole, watching endless columns of American armor roll past his position. The Shermans that his crew had once dismissed as Ronsons now moved with the mechanical confidence of absolute victory. Their crews looked rested, well-fed, and completely secure in their overwhelming superiority. The statistics told the story that German propaganda could no longer hide. American factory production had reached levels that defied comprehension. In July 1944 alone, American plants delivered more than 2,000 tanks to European depots. The Wehrmacht, fighting on multiple fronts with depleted industrial capacity, could barely replace 100. A captured German logistics officer, interviewed by American intelligence, provided the most telling assessment. "We calculated that each Sherman destroyed would take months to replace. Instead, you replace them overnight. We were fighting mathematics, not tactics. The mathematics of industrial democracy." The sensory memories would haunt German survivors for decades. The sweet, sick smell of burning rubber and textiles from destroyed vehicles. The way morning mist carried the odor of hot metal and hydraulic fluid across fields littered with the skeletons of what had once been the Reich's finest armor. The sight of French farmers returning to find their orchards shredded by tank tracks and shell fragments, their grain fields reduced to charred stubble that crunched underfoot like broken glass. Most devastating was the scale of waste that American abundance allowed. Richter watched his captors discard half-eaten meals that contained more meat than German rations provided in a week. American mechanics threw away spare parts that German crews would have treasured. The casual destruction of perfectly functional equipment deemed too damaged for frontline service revealed an industrial capacity that treated even complex machinery as disposable. "They fought like millionaires," wrote Oberst Heinrich Meyer, the highest-ranking German officer captured in the Falaise Pocket. "Every problem solved with overwhelming force. Every tactical challenge met with unlimited resources. We brought skill to a contest of production capacity." The burned fields themselves became monuments to the transformation of warfare. Aerial reconnaissance photographs from late August showed vast black scars across the Norman countryside, not just from individual battles, but from the systematic destruction of an entire military force. The charred earth stretched for kilometers, marked by the geometric patterns of tank tracks, artillery craters, and the twisted metal graves where German armor had died. Local French farmers, returning to assess the damage, found landscapes transformed beyond recognition. Marcel Dubois, whose family had worked the same fields near Falaise for 3 centuries, wrote in his diary, "The earth itself seemed wounded. Where wheat had grown, only ash remained. The very soil was black with oil from the burned machines. It would take years for anything to grow here again." The psychological impact on surviving German tank crews exceeded any physical damage. Men who had entered Normandy, believing in the invincibility of German engineering, now faced the reality that technical superiority meant nothing against unlimited production. The Americans hadn't just defeated German tanks. They had overwhelmed them with a flood of adequate machines produced at inconceivable speed. In prisoner of war camps across England and America, captured Panzer crews struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. Werner Kleist, Richter's former gunner, wrote to his family from a camp in Texas, "We thought we were the best soldiers in the world. Perhaps we were, but they were the best factory workers in the world, and that made all the difference." The strategic consequences rippled far beyond Normandy. With Army Group West destroyed and the Falaise pocket eliminated, the road to Paris lay open. More importantly, the Wehrmacht had lost its mobile reserve in the West. The panzer divisions that might have contained future Allied offensives were now scrap metal scattered across French fields. Hitler's Atlantic Wall, designed to stop the Allied invasion at the beaches, had been bypassed and abandoned. The fortress Europe that German propaganda had promised was impregnable had been cracked open by the simple expedient of building more tanks than the defenders could destroy. But perhaps the most telling evidence of the transformation came from German combat reports themselves. The confident assessments of June, filled with dismissive references to inferior American equipment, had given way to resigned admissions of defeat. A captured operations order from late August read simply, "Withdraw to prepared positions. Conserve remaining vehicles. No engagement unless absolutely necessary." The hunters had become the hunted. The fields that had witnessed this transformation remained scarred for years after the war's end. French farmers, returning to restore their damaged land, continued to unearth fragments of the battle, twisted pieces of armor plate, shell casings by the thousands, personal effects from crews who had died, convinced of their superiority. Some fields proved too contaminated by fuel and lubricants to cultivate immediately. The oil from hundreds of destroyed vehicles had soaked deep into the Norman soil, creating dead zones where nothing would grow. These black patches served as enduring reminders of the price paid when tactical skill met unlimited industrial capacity. Today, 79 years later, French farmers still occasionally unearth fragments of that terrible summer pieces of tank armor, unexploded shells, dog tags from crews who learned too late that mockery was a luxury only victors could afford. The confident panzer crews who had laughed at Sherman tanks in June 1944 had written their own epitaph in the ashes of Norman fields. They had underestimated not just American armor, but American resolve, American production, and American willingness to accept casualties in pursuit of total victory. The Wehrmacht had brought Europe's finest soldiers to Normandy. America had brought something more powerful, the arsenal of democracy at full production. In the end, the choice between quality and quantity proved to be no choice at all. Industrial might had triumphed over martial skill. The fields burned black with German armor, testified to a simple truth that would reshape the post-war world. In modern warfare, the nation that could build the most tanks would drive them across the enemy's grave. The mockery had ended. The accounting had begun, and the price had been paid in full.